Today, we are diving into a huge legal battle, a moment that's being called a planetary-scale reckoning for climate change. It's an incredible story, really, about how an idea that started in a classroom traveled all the way to the world's highest court, all in a powerful effort to hold nations accountable for our warming planet.
You see, for nations like the Pacific island of Vanuatu, this isn't some problem for the future. It's about survival, right now. They are on the absolute front lines, dealing with massive cyclones, coastlines getting swallowed up, and rising sea levels that threaten their very existence. This is the human face of the crisis, the immediate reality that kicked off a truly audacious plan.
So, faced with what felt like a total international deadlock on climate action, a group of Pacific Islander law students in Vanuatu decided to think way outside the box. Their question was pretty simple, but also profound. What if you could use international law to actually force countries to act? Could you, literally put the entire climate crisis on trial?
But this isn't just a story about small islands. Not at all. The threat of a warming planet comes with a devastating human cost, and it's being felt on a massive scale all around the globe.
Just take Pakistan, for example. In 2022, a massive superflood put a third of the entire country underwater. A staggering 33 million people were affected. The World Bank figured the damages were around $30 billion. And look, those aren't just numbers. They represent millions of lives, homes, and futures just washed away.
And you have to understand, this wasn't just some random act of nature. Scientists are very clear on this. As climate scientist Friederike Otto points out, Pakistan is a hotspot for the kind of extreme rainfall that's fueled by climate change. The science is pretty straightforward. A warmer atmosphere holds more moisture, and that leads to more intense downpours and these kinds of catastrophic floods.
So whether we're talking about melting glaciers in the Himalayas causing flash floods, or historic droughts across Africa, or storm surges swallowing coastlines in the Pacific, a shared story starts to emerge. It's a story of vulnerability. For communities on the front lines, this is a genuine battle for survival against forces they really didn't do much to create.
So how in the world did an idea from a classroom turn into a massive international legal case? Well, it was a truly remarkable journey.
This timeline really shows you the incredible speed of this movement. I mean, it kicked off in 2019 with just a simple idea. By 2023, the government of Vanuatu had championed this cause all the way to the UN, and that led to a historic hearing in early 2025, where over 100 nations showed up to make their case. From a classroom to the world stage in just a handful of years, it's amazing.
And this was the destination, the International Court of Justice in The Hague. Now, this isn't just any old court. It's the main judicial body of the United Nations. The challenge they were undertaking was immense, to ask its 15 judges to clarify for the very first time what legal obligations nations actually have to protect the planet's climate.
So after months of deliberation, the court delivered its opinion, and it was a moment that observers say is going to echo through history.
And here is the absolutely crucial part. The decision wasn't split. It wasn't ambiguous. All 15 judges agreed. That kind of unanimity sends an incredibly powerful signal to the entire world about what international law has to say on climate change.
So what did they actually say? Well, let's break it down. First, they said countries have a legal duty to prevent climate change. Second, if they fail to do that, it's considered a wrongful act, which, opens the door for things like reparations. Third, they confirmed that a healthy environment is a fundamental human right. And finally, they said countries can't just pass the buck to corporations. They are responsible for regulating their emissions. This isn't just a list. This is a radical reframing of climate change. It's moving from just an environmental issue to a human rights crisis.
Now, it's important to know that this ruling is technically non-binding, but its impact is expected to be enormous. As expert Wesley Morgan puts it, the effects are going to be felt everywhere. It completely changes the conversation from one about voluntary promises to one about legal obligations.
But all that legal clarity is about to run headfirst into a very messy reality. The fight now moves out of the courtroom and into the complicated world of international politics.
Okay, so to really get the political debate, we need to know two key terms. First is mitigation. That's all about stopping the problem at its source, cutting emissions. The other is adaptation. That's about learning to live with the consequences we can't avoid anymore, like building seawalls. Both are absolutely essential, but they involve very different and often difficult political choices.
Now, when it comes to adaptation, there's a big political dilemma. Hard adaptation means building big, visible projects like dams or seawalls. Politicians tend to love these because they can point to them and say, "Look what I built." But soft adaptation, things like improving community planning or setting up better early warning systems, is just as vital, but it's less flashy and it often gets less funding and attention.
And this political reality leads to just immense frustration. At the annual global climate summits, which are known as COP, activists from Pacific nations often feel like they're just fighting for scraps. As activist Joseph Sakulu says, they're forced to celebrate these tiny incremental steps forward when what they actually need is huge transformative action just to survive.
And you have to remember, the whole system is kind of stacked against them. Pacific delegates travel for days, they often arrive completely exhausted, and they're vastly outnumbered. One negotiator even recalled being in a room for 3 days straight without sleep because they just didn't have enough people. And all the while, they're up against the powerful, incredibly well-funded influence of the fossil fuel industry.
And to make matters even worse, sometimes the solutions themselves end up creating new problems. There's a concept for this. It's called maladaptation. So, for example, a community might build a massive seawall to protect itself, but that very structure could just redirect the ocean's energy and end up causing severe erosion and flooding for their neighbors right down the coast. It can become a zero-sum game that just shifts the risk from one vulnerable group to another.
So, with this really difficult political landscape, you might be wondering, how does the World Court's ruling actually change anything? Well, it provides a powerful new tool in this fight for climate justice.
Here's how it works. First off, it gives vulnerable nations huge legal leverage in negotiations. They're not just making a moral argument anymore, they are now armed with a clear statement of international law. Second, it opens the door for a lot more lawsuits. A farmer in a drought-stricken country could, in theory, use this opinion to sue a major polluting nation in their own domestic court. And third, it establishes a new global standard for what responsible climate action is supposed to look like.
This is exactly why experts are calling this a day of reckoning. The ruling makes it crystal clear that governments have a legal duty to act, and that includes reining in the fossil fuel industry, which the court actually called out specifically. It really does create a whole new era of accountability.
So, the World Court has spoken. It's delivered what one advocate called a call to conscience. And while the opinion isn't a legally binding order that forces anyone to do anything, it is a clear, powerful, and unanimous declaration of legal and moral responsibility. The question it leaves for all of us is, who's going to answer the call?